So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Alan Watkins, and before we start, this session's going to be quite intimate, so we've got about 40 minutes, and I'm going to try and give most of the time to you for your questions. So we're going to have a little bit of a very brief chat on stage, and then I'm going to throw it open, so people with roving mics are going to come round. Prepare your questions now, and in about 5 or 6 minutes we'll come to you. But before we start that, I just wanted maybe to get a sense of how many people's lives have been touched by mental health issues. So if you've personally experienced some of the challenges of mental health, or it's been directly in your family, your first-degree relative, I wonder if you'd mind just standing up. Don't think of it as a badge of honor if you don't stand up, but so I think it's really amazing that it has touched so many of our lives. So thank you. Please sit down. I think you can look around, and it affects all of us in one way or another, and it certainly affected me. As my training as a physician, I came up close and personal on many, many occasions with people who were challenged by this. I also have 4 sons, one of which is profoundly autistic. And those of you who may know a little bit about autism know that the amygdala, the fear center in their brain, is twice normal size. So my autistic son is profoundly affected with anxiety and fear. Also, I lost my sister, my beautiful sister Karen, to suicide about 20 years ago. So it's something that really matters to me. So it touches all of our lives. So I think, you know, we're going to hear from the guys in a moment how it's touched their lives, and then we're going to throw it open to questions from the room. So, Alastair, if I may start with you, I don't think the audience need to be introduced, and if they don't know who you are, there's the bio in the pamphlet.
Is that a way of you just not doing your job?
It's a way of giving you more time and not wasting it on... So we heard from Sue this morning that one of the issues in mental health is the ability to tell your employer that there's a problem. And I wonder if you'd mind sharing with us how you told your employer at the time before you got the job with Tony Blair. So is that something you're happy to share with us?
Well, I mean, Tony knew that I'd had a history of alcohol abuse. I'd had a breakdown. He knew all that because we were friends. What he didn't know, because I didn't kind of go around sort of talking about it the whole time, was just exactly what happened. And, you know, when he asked me to work for him, I was genuinely worried, partly because my family didn't want me to do it. Also, I knew that I'd broken down, I'd cracked up once before, and I thought, well, this pressure's going to be a lot worse, and how do I know I won't do it again? So it was Tony's got very, very good antennae, and I was on holiday in France. He'd asked me to do the job. I said no several times. He then kept at me, and then I said, well, look, I'm going to take a month to think about it. So I went on holiday. I went with Neil and Glenys Kinnet on holiday in France. And he got a vibe. Tony got a vibe. He was over in a different part of France, and he arrived with Cherie, with the kids, with his mother-in-law. Just turned up. And he'd worked out that Fiona and Neil were trying to talk me out of it, which they were. So he tried to talk me back into it. I knew I was going to do it anyway in my heart. His mother-in-law had to go home. Just to get out of this holiday from hell, I said, I'll drive you to the airport. Tony says, I'll go with you. We'll go down to the airport, drop her off at Marseille, I'm driving back, and I thought, right, I'm really going to tell him now. So I went through, I had what I call the conversation that David Cameron and Andy Coulson never had. I told him everything in my past that could be a problem. You know, and there's quite a lot. So when I got around to the breakdown, and I said, look, you know, it was pretty grim, you know, and it could happen again, because it's happened once. And I told him, and I was driving along, and I was kind of just catching his eye in the mirror every now and then. I was looking over. And I got to the bit where I said, and so then I get arrested, I'm in this police cell, and I've taken all my clothes off, and I'm banging my head against the wall, and I've got music over here, I've got a bagpipe band over here, I've got a brass band here, I've got a row in the office going here, I've got a row with Fiona going on the back of my head over here, I've got a television playing at full volume up here, and I'm seeing Tony doing what I would later come to know and love as his Bambi look. He's sort of going, oh. Yeah. But then he said, well, look, I'm not bothered if you're not bothered. And I said, well, what if I'm bothered? And he said, I'm still not bothered. So that was quite a moment, you know? And it basically was him saying, and I'd actually, you know, so much of this is about employers. You can have government legislation, you can have government money, but in the end, employers have got to take the lead on this because they've got to be the ones who say, I am prepared, just as you don't identify somebody if they've got cancer as saying, you are cancerous, that you don't, if somebody's asthmatic, you don't say, oh, my asthmatic friend Geoff, you know? But with mental illness, that's what we do. We identify people by it.
Yes.
You know. So employers and you know, you talk about your sister. I had a brother who died a couple of years ago. He had schizophrenia all of his adult life. He held down the same job for 27 years at Glasgow University because they were a great employer. They did not see him as a schizophrenic. They saw him as an employee that they valued. He had schizophrenia. Sometimes he couldn't work. Usually when he was well and he stopped taking his drugs. So employers are fundamental to this, and so I thought that was, you know, quite a signal.
So thank you for that story. And so employers being so unbelievably crucial to this is a nice segue to Geoff. And Geoff and I have known each other for a while. Senior figure in Unilever. So you're very passionate, Geoff, about what organisations can do, but maybe again you could share a little bit of why it's touched your life and how it's touched your life and why you care about it.
I thought you were going to ask me, why did Nelson Mandela ask me the sort of question that Tony Blair asked Alastair, but no, that didn't happen. I want you to picture the scene. It's the 25th of January, 2008, and the reason that I do not forget that date is that on the 26th of January 2008 was to be my daughter's 13th birthday. So picture the scene of what our home is like on the evening of the 25th of January 2008 when your young girl at midnight is going to go through a rite of passage and become this wonderful teenager. So you can imagine the amount of excitement in the home on the evening of the 25th of January 2008. And at midnight on the 25th of January 2008, I wake up with the most massive of panic attacks. Now, I had never, ever experienced a panic attack in all my life, up until that point. And so you can imagine what goes through my mind. I think I'm about to have a heart attack. And I bump my wife, who's been married to me at that stage for 20-odd years, Debbie, and I say to Deb, I'm about to have a heart attack. And she turns and says, have it. No, she didn't, okay? She didn't. And so she says, why? And I explain. She says, you've got pains in your arms and your chest. And I say, I haven't got any of that. And she just says, get up, walk around the room, take some deep breaths, which I do. And slowly my levels of anxiety begin to subside. I get myself back into bed, but I cannot go back to sleep. And all I can do for the next 7 or 8 hours, from midnight through until about 7:30 the next morning, is procrastinate, ruminate, and catastrophize. I remember getting up at about 3 o'clock in the morning, going into the bathroom. I had the sore on the inside of my mouth, looking in the mirror, getting back into bed, and convincing myself that I now had the beginning of throat cancer. Anyway, cut a long story short, by about 11 o'clock the next morning, I'm still in bed. Debbie has eventually persuaded you know those alpha male South Africans out there? You know them? Persuaded one of them to just go and see the doctor. And off I go to the doctor, and I have a conversation with the doctor with some very weird questions that get asked of me. And at about midday on the 26th of January 2008, I get diagnosed with anxiety-fueled depression. Now, my understanding of the word depression up until that point is a little bit like any Arsenal supporters in the room? Any of you? I'm one of them, right? Yeah. So my understanding of the word depression was getting to the end, about a third to go of the season, and turning to my wife and saying, I am so depressed about this Arsenal football side. That's my understanding of the word depression up until the 26th of January, midday 2008. And I get diagnosed with anxiety-fueled depression. Take 3 months off work, get myself better. After about 3 months, go back to work. 2010, I have a relapse. Nothing as bad as 2008. And then October of 2012, I'm leaving Unilever house on 100 Victoria Embankment. And I'm walking over Blackfriars Bridge down to Waterloo. My telephone goes, and on the end of the phone is my wife. She says, Geoff, I've got terrible news. You can imagine my first thought on my 2 girls, are they okay? And she says, no, they're fine, but your best friend is dead. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow. Ruby Wax, Stephen Fry, Robin Williams. And that's the sort of person he was. And I lay in bed that night and I thought to myself, you know what? Stigma has just killed my friend. Because had he had any physical illness, he would have put his hand up, he would have got help, he would have got support. But because he was suffering from mental illness, he couldn't do it. And I lay in bed that night and I thought to myself, I have to do something about this. This is just not fair. But here I am, a South African living down in Surrey. My network is a bunch of South Africans. My other network is inside Unilever. How am I going to have any impact? And then I think, you know, there's one guy out there. There's one guy out there that if I could just meet with him, he might just help me to begin to go out and to advocate and campaign to break the stigma around mental ill health in the workplace. And so I go onto his website, and I pray that there will be an email address on his website. And down in the bottom right-hand corner is an email address. And so I send him an email. And the email is to Geoff.McDonald. It's from Geoff.McDonald@btinternet.com. This is not an email from Tony Blair to Alastair Campbell. Within 10 minutes, he'd responded to my email. A week later, we met up in Belsize Park, and ever since that day, he began to open doors for me to go out and to advocate to break the stigma of mental ill health in the workplace.
Never worked since.
So I've got some prepared questions, but I'd much rather throw it open to the floor. So if we could have the lights up. As questions start to bubble up, anybody brewing right, already we've got one, thank you. So let's, and if I could ask you to ask a question, not make a comment, and the contract will be the chaps will try and keep their responses as brief as possible so we can get through as many questions as possible. So, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name's Doug, and I'm particularly interested in the assertion you made earlier on, Alastair, about the fact that employers are responsible for unlocking this. You may or may not have been here earlier on, but there was a question posed about how many people here would feel comfortable talking about their mental health problems with family and friends, and most people said they would. And then the same question was asked about how people would feel about discussing in a job interview, and nobody put their hand up. And as somebody who sometimes wrestles with some of this stuff, I'm very conscious that even talking to you now, I may be limiting opportunities. So my question to you is, have you got any ideas on how we bridge what feels to me quite a toxic and dangerous gap, please?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was watching the Twitter war while it wasn't that it was brilliant, Geoff, but I was just my eye was drawn over your shoulder, and somebody pointed out the big difference between everybody standing up and the fact that it might have been you even that question, when that question was asked earlier, nobody raised their hand. I mean, the answer has to be a very general one. Until we crash down the walls of stigma, people are going to carry on feeling they can't talk about it. Now, I talked about my experience with Tony. I'd had a prior experience of that with an employer, which I think in some ways kind of saved my life, because when I was in hospital, one of the first calls I got was from my former employer at the Daily Mirror, a guy called Richard Stott. And I'd fallen out with him when I left the paper to go and work somewhere else. I had the breakdown, I'm in hospital, and he phones me up and he says, I remember this verbatim, he said, "I hear you've gone mad." I said, "Well, I'm not well." He said, "Well," he said, "Well, I'm not going to tell you I told you so," which is a deeply unsubtle way of saying, "I told you so. But here's what you've got to do. Stay there in hospital for as long as you have to. Go back to today, my new employer, until you're really fit. When you're really fit, come back here. Thing is, you're going to start at the bottom again." And it was a lifesaver for me, because he was the first person that actually, outside my family, that was not identifying me in that way. That has given me not just the sort of the feeling that the confidence, but also the feeling that I should do what Geoff and I do, which is go out and campaign on this. Because until we have every employer able to think like that, we're going to trap people inside the walls of stigma. And, you know, whenever you do talks like this, at the end of it, Jim's very kindly bought a small number of my new book, and it's going to be first come, first served, by the way. They're free, but you've got to get there fast. But whenever I do like a talk like this, and you maybe do at the end of it, people come and talk to you, and somebody wants to have a picture, and you just yatter away, and then there's always a few people hold back. I can spot them a mile off, and I call them whisperers. And I'll have been out here saying, talking about my breakdown, talking about depression, whatever it might be. And the reason I call them the whisperers is they always come up and they just say, "Thanks for what you're doing on mental health." And I say, "Why are you whispering?" But they're whispering because they're scared. And I've met people. I met a nurse recently. She's in the National Health Service. She's bipolar. She's never, ever told anybody. And the reason she says is she does not believe, if it was known she was being treated for bipolar disorder, she does not believe she'd get any chance of getting promoted. She could be right, she could be wrong. That's what she believes. And the other thing where I say employers are important, if you're in human resources and you're in recruitment and you see job applications and they're identical, same O-levels, same A-levels, same sort of background, same sort of schools, gap year, all that stuff, they've done everything, but one of them says, in this 6 months when this one was helping refugees in Calais, this one says, "I had a really bad breakdown and I was in rehab for 6 months, I was a drug addict, whatever." I say, go for that one. What do we want in people today? We want honesty and we want resilience. And you're going to get it more from that necessarily than you get from that. So I think until we actually start to think that it's not all bad and that if you get through it, it can be good, I think my mental health makes me what I am. I think my breakdown made me what I do. He's the same. So don't see it all as negative. And once we get that as a mindset, this stuff goes away.
So more questions from the floor, right here at the front, if we may. Thank you, by the way, for having the courage to speak up.
Tara Tapper from Equinity. My question relates to good work and how we design good jobs, particularly in a talent-scarce world. And it's about diversity of thought and valuing difference. So Alan, you shared the example about your son being autistic. I've got an autistic son as well. Or it was your daughter, wasn't it? So it's about how can we design good jobs that actually take into consider differing contributions, different skills, but in a way that enable people to be their authentic selves and fulfill their own potential.
Do you want to start off, Geoff?
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't know the absolute answer to that question about how do we design good jobs, but let me say two things. The first thing is, I think organizations need to begin to recognize mental health as a key component of people's overall well-being, a key component of well-being, which if you get it right, really enhances the energy of that person. You see, I spent 25 years in HR. I never once had a development conversation with anybody, any member of my team, about their energy. I spoke to them about knowledge, skills, behaviors. Why did I never talk to anybody about the most important driver of their performance, their energy, or passion, or capacity to get things done? Because I don't think things are going to change overnight, that we're suddenly going to come up with wonderfully designed jobs, that we are going to go away from quarterly reporting, that we are going to have this panacea where it's going to be so easy in workplaces. That's not changing overnight, right? We're all working in hugely demanding workplaces. But what I think organizations need to start doing is recognizing that energy is the most important driver of the performance of their people. And so, therefore, what are they doing as an organization to enhance the energy of their people? And what I mean is, what are they doing to enhance their physical health? And some organizations do that. What are they doing to enhance the emotional health of their people? What are they doing to enhance the mental health of their people? And has the organization got a sense of purpose and meaning beyond just making money? Because that's the consequence of being a good business, is to make money. It's not its purpose. And so I think organizations have got to take a more holistic view of this. Guess what? We've done it in safety. We spend billions in health and safety. It's all gone to safety. It's all gone to safety. When are organizations going to have the same level of leadership advocacy and engagement to invest in the health of their people? Why? Because they'll be energized and they will perform well, even in demanding environments. But right now, what do? There are a few bananas at the till in the canteen, all right? So we've sorted out our mental health and well-being issues. And so organizations need to take accountability. Organizations need to take more accountability of having resources in place for all of those levels. And then, you know what? I think we as individuals have also got to take accountability for looking after our well-being. Because you see, if you haven't got the right skills to do the job, the organization's got the resources in place and they send you on a training course. If you don't go on the training course, and your performance dips, what happens? We have a tough conversation. Nobody's held accountable for their energy in organizations today. So when Alastair and I come into the organization and we talk about sleep during the well-being week, which, by the way, we run a well-being week because we have 1 week a year where we care for people. And the other 51 weeks we don't really care, but we show care in 1 week, which is the well-being week. And we come and we talk about mental health, or we come and talk about sleep. Guess what? 20 people come to listen to us. Although, no, maybe not Alastair, but for me, 20 come and listen to us. All right? 10. 10. Okay. Why? Because you're not going to be held accountable for your energy. And so I think we've got to accept that the workplace is demanding. It doesn't matter what sector I go into. The workplace is demanding today. And yes, jobs are not designed 100% right, and I know we can improve on that. But that is not going to stop us. I think what we've got to do is take a bigger view and say, look, let's invest, let's advocate in putting the resources in place to make people healthier and energized, like we've done with safety. And let's also get people and hold them accountable for their energy in an organization. And guess what? We almost can do that now because we know what gives people energy and we can measure it.
Can I just very briefly add to that? I think the thing that answer doesn't take account of, and something that I don't think we're even beginning to get our heads around yet, is the extent to which jobs in the future are going to be very different to what we think jobs are now. And I think that is something we should run towards and embrace. The whole thing about flexible working, home working, people feeling that, I mean, the proportion of people are going to be self-employed. The way that robotics and artificial intelligence are going to destroy jobs that even recently created jobs that are going to be that we've taken for granted. So that is going to have, I think, an impact upon people's well-being, unless we actually understand the importance of the development of resilience. And that's something for me, I think that we've got to build in the idea that you can teach, you can develop resilience, and you can do that within the school curriculum. And that's so that I think we'll go right back to the sort of education given to kids and what sort of world we're preparing for them, because it's going to be a very different world to the one that we're in.
I also just want to comment a little bit about the question that was asked earlier, around organizations and Alastair's point around narrative and language. I think we've got to find a way of creating a new narrative. And he's not going to like me for this, but I don't use the word breakdown. You know what? It was my breakthrough in life. As soon as I use the word breakdown, I'm going to some negative place. It was my breakthrough in life. I don't like the word resilience because it conjures up, I've got to toughen you up. I prefer the word resourcefulness. How do we make people more resourceful? How do we energize people more? When I use the word mental health, people immediately go to the negative. They go to depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. When I use the word physical health, people don't immediately go to cancer, diabetes. Hey, they don't. So now I'm very careful about, let's talk about mental ill health. Because guess what? We've all got mental health. And we're all mental. And we're all physical. We are. So this narrative, my other example of this is walk into a Nike store. Walk into a Nike store. What do you see plastered all over the walls? In a Nike store or an Adidas store? Do you want to stand up, Alastair? Do you want to stand up?
What if I break down?
No, stand up. But what you see plastered all over the walls are chiseled whippets.
Oh, yeah.
Chiseled whippets. But my point is, you see those chiseled whippets, and you feel, and you look at me, and you kind of think, I'm inspired to go and buy a pair of running shoes. What are the images you see around mental health? They are so negative. Geoff McDonald with his head in his hands, some black and white photograph. I mean, what is inspirational and aspirational about looking after my mental health? Nothing out there. Who's the Usain Bolt of mental health? So this narrative, the way we talk about it, I think is so important if we are going to address the stigma that if I have suffered from a mental ill health condition, I'm weak and I can't take the heat in the kitchen.
Yeah, when did I say that?
No, you didn't say that.
So
but do you know what I mean?
No, listen, let's give them a bit more time. We can talk about this backstage. I'm not entirely convinced.
So the plan to keep the answers
exactly.
brief...
Shut the fuck up is what he's saying.
Thank you, Geoff. So no doubt, when we reduce the beauty of humanity down to some dimension, you're not who you are, you're a mental thing. Or when we even reduce, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, down to just mental, we lose something really important, right? So we've got to keep the whole person and all that they can bring, obviously. So have we got some more questions from the audience? There's a gentleman right there with his hand up, if we could get a mic to him. Thank you.
I'm trying.
And I promise they'll keep their answers brief.
And it's Ed Fox from the Financial Conduct Authority.
Oh, you're in the news today.
Are we? Well, I'll talk about mental health. We only make change happen when we change our governance structures, our systems, and our policies. What human resource work can we be doing to change the structures that will enable people who have mental health problems to thrive and bring their talent to the workplace in the way that you describe the talented people that you are on the chair?
Well, I mean, when I was a journalist before I, jumped the fence into politics, and there was, back in the day when newspapers were, had very powerful trade unions, we had this system called the chapel. And you had a father and a mother of the chapel. So the newsroom had a chapel, the photographers had a chapel, the sports desk had a chapel. And they elected a mother and a father, mother or a father. And it wasn't hierarchical, but it was the person that you kind of felt, if we got into a problem, they'd be the best that we'd all trust to kind of help us try and sort it out. Now, that was on industrial relations. But I kind of feel that is the sort of, because this isn't hierarchical. I've worked in organizations where the people at the top just do not get this. They don't get it. Now, hopefully, there'll be a generational shift and they'll go off and retire and a new generation will come in. But you'll find people lower down in the organization who really get it. And they might be working in the human resources department. You'll find people in human resources department who don't get it at all. You will find bosses who get it. So I think we need a little bit of horses for courses on this. And I like the idea of within any organization having somebody, and then you can go through things they could do that probably they would be. You heard from Sue Baker from Time to Change. I think every employer should sign up as a Time to Change employer. It sends a signal. I think that every person who would become this sort of father, mother of the chapel type person would train in mental health first aid. Just sort of simple, basic things that can be done that slowly and then rapidly, once you hit the tipping point, you change the culture. So I think it's identifying, saying it's a priority and meaning it's a priority, understanding it from the self-interested point of view, that healthier organization will be a stronger, more effective organization, and empowering individuals at every level of it to be the person that we know we can go to if we're struggling. We can go to, without fear or favour, if we think somebody else might be struggling. Can I say struggling, Geoff? Is that allowed? Yeah? Okay. I don't want to worry about your narrative. We're all holding hands and kumbaya, my lord, and all that stuff, Thank you.
Thank you, Alastair.
I mean, a simple thing for me would be the performance management system. So in your performance management system, have you got energy? Do you have development conversations about people about their energy? As simple as that. I bet you talk to people about their knowledge, skills, and behaviors. Do you talk to people about their energy? And we kind of know what gives us energy, and we can measure it now. So imagine if we could start to have really human conversations and development conversations about people's energy. So put it into the performance management system or the development system. Because I agree with you, systems drive culture.
And there are some great apps that you can get that will track this for you. So,
baseball cap.
Okay, great.
Sore arm.
Thank you. We need
microphone,
a microphone,
baseball
microphone
cap,
over here.
Baseball cap. Well done.
I'm sure he's more than a baseball cap, Alastair, but...
No, but you know.
Yeah.
Hi. Rob from Technicolor. No, I'm just a baseball cap. That's me. Going back to the first statement about talking about mental health at interview, that's, I think, is under the assumption that the interviewer is asking the question, which I don't think they are. I think we ask the question of how do you manage work-life balance, and it alludes to the mental health. Should we be more direct and just ask the question, how do you manage your mental health?
You see, this is where I feel kind of... see, I've got a very nice life. I don't want a job. I will probably never... I've only ever done one proper interview in my life, and that was the first job I ever got. I don't want a job. I've got loads of different things that I do, and it's fine. Those whisperers who come up to me and tell me they're terrified of letting their boss know, I completely understand it. Now, what I'm trying to do is to break it down, if you like, at the campaigning level. If I was not who I am and, people know about my past and stuff, would I bring that out into the open in the way that I do at a platform like this? I just don't know. I hope I would. I hope I would. Because here's the other thing, and this is easy again for me to say, I don't want to work for a company that doesn't get this stuff. I don't want to be part of them. And I think sometimes we all have to take, Geoff talked about personal and collective responsibility. I think sometimes, even a difficult job market, we're entitled to make judgments about, you know what, thanks for the offer, I don't want your job. I don't like what you stand for. Purpose, values, all that stuff. So I think it's a tricky one. But all I'm saying is until we do feel that we can direct that conversation any which way we want, and they're going to understand what we're saying, then we're not in a good place.
Question here. Hang on, can we get the microphone to you if you don't mind? If you could pass that along. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Mira Shah. I think a lot of what you guys are saying is about how mental health awareness needs to come from leadership. So I just wanted to ask Alastair, if you were back to being a strategist, a communications director for an MP or for Tony Blair, and he had a mental health condition, how would you work with him to own up to his vulnerability, both as a private person and as a public person?
Cool. I thought you were going to say, if you were back in Downing Street advising the current Prime Minister.
Let's make sure he doesn't dodge the question now.
Right, now I'm not going to dodge
Bit of deflection.
And I'll tell you what I would say, stop Brexit, right? Do us all a favour. That's what I'd say to her on that one. So that's a really tricky one. There was a Norwegian Prime Minister who had really, really, really bad depression. And he went to the cabinet and he said, listen, guys, you know I've struggled with this depression for quite a long time. I just don't feel I can do the job anymore. I can't do it. And there was a kind of uprising at the cabinet table. Now, I know Norway's, you know, very, very rich and very different sort of country to ours, but they basically refused to accept his resignation. And they told him to take time off. And I remember once saying to Tony, says, this guy took time off, and by a month, on the sick, at the end of it, his poll ratings were higher than any Prime Minister in Europe. Now, I think it's really, really hard here. The only direct thing I can think of in terms of this is when Charles Kennedy was still alive. And Charles, although he was a different party, was a very good friend of mine. And I was one of the few people that he used to talk to about his alcohol problem. And I tried really, really, really hard to get Charles to be open about it. He was leader of the Liberal Democrats. And he just felt he couldn't. He just felt he couldn't. And I understood why he felt that. He was worried about what his colleagues would do with it. He was worried about what his opponents would do with it. He was worried about what the media would do with it. He was worried about what his constituents would think of it. And so I understand it. I think if I'd ever had a worry, I think Tony Blair actually, you know, given the pressures of the job and everything else, I think he's a very, very kind of pretty measured sort of guy. But I think if I'd have ever felt that there was a level of mental ill health that maybe was affecting his ability to do the job, I like to think I'd be able to confront that. But I don't work in the White House right now. So I think I would. I'm not sure that was a cheap shot either, by the way. I think I would like to be able to think. I'd be able to say, listen, let's get this out in the open. But hand on heart, would I have done that? I never had to confront that.
And I think it's an indication of how much further we've got to travel, right?
Exactly.
Is that we can't just be open about this and see it as part of who we are, our resourcefulness. So did you want to add anything about the narrative around, like, if you had to advise, I mean, and you know, Dec are in the news this week for his struggle with alcohol. So how do we get to a different place on the narrative?
I mean, I agree 100% with what Alastair has said. We've still got such a long way to go in breaking the stigma. And you know, for me, yes, it takes brave, courageous people to share and tell their stories. But it also requires us to just invest in educating everybody. You know, think about your organizations. Everybody gets a safety training. They all get training on safety. Why are we not doing the same around mental health, where everybody is just given a 90-minute basic appreciation, understanding of mental ill health in their workplaces? Because then we lift the levels of skills, understanding, and that, I think, goes some way to breaking the stigma. But we're not there yet, and we haven't invested in that. We're still investing in safety training.
Can I just say can I challenge his narrative very briefly? I don't like this brave thing. I don't like this, it's courageous and brave to speak out, because I think that is stigmatizing. Why is it brave? Why is it brave to, I don't feel brave when I talk about having cracked up in the 80s. I am so proud of that. I'm so proud of the fact that I did that and then I've gone on to do all the different things that I've done. I don't think that's brave. And I think while we consider it to be brave, we are basically saying this is an exceptional thing to do. And it's got to become the norm. We have got to move to a position where we feel we can be as open about our mental health as we are about our physical health. And until we do that, I don't think we're going to break down the walls of stigma and taboo. I think they're going, but they're going far too slowly. And the other thing, I've tried not to get too political today, apart from Brexit, but I must say the one thing I'm really, really, really worried about at the moment is that the policymakers and the people with the money, the government, they are using this battle against stigma and taboo, saying that's going really well, which it is, not least thanks to people like Sue at Time to Change, and to good employers. It is going well. But I think they're using that to say, while that's going well, it means we don't actually have to put the money in for the services that we find aren't there when people who report mental illness, report mental ill health, find that you can go and get stuck on a waiting list for a couple of years.
So we've got a very brief 1-minute film from Time to Change before I hand back to Tim and Margaret, who's going to close. But there's still obviously a long way to go, and the first step is being explicit. Till we can start to talk to each other about this very issue, we won't really make much progress. So I just want to give you an opportunity to thank Alastair and Geoff for some inspirational thoughts.
Join the Twitter.
And I believe we have a VT from Time to Change, is that correct?
Straight out the gate, the hate of the state makes very outright the fate of the great majority of the minority, not a priority, and that part is me. Fight for the country, hump me, then dump me off to the side and try to bubble gum.
Whoa. Can I help you?
We're John's mates. Is he around?
Yeah. He's over there.
Cheers, mate.
Right, John. All right, boys. Go sit down.
1 in 4 of us will fight mental health problems this year.
You can do this, John. We're with you.
We're with you, mate.
Having a mate in your corner can make all the difference. So if your mate's acting differently, step in.
Here we go now. The bell's out.
Search Time to Change